Lawn darts had steel tips, weighed over a pound, and were marketed as a backyard game for children as young as 5. By 1988, after thousands of emergency room visits, the federal government banned them nationwide. 1980s that were sold to millions of Americans. One was a toy that caused burns severe enough to require skin grafts. Another was a household appliance that passed safety inspections and still set houses on fire. A third sat in garages across the country, quietly releasing a substance now classified as a carcinogen, and nobody knew until years later. These are the 60 most dangerous inventions from the 1980s that are now completely banned. But many hair dryers in the early 1980s came with a deadly little secret: asbestos insulation. That's right, cozy warmth was courtesy of the same stuff that gets entire buildings condemned today. Asbestos was packed inside the heating coils to keep things running safely at high temps. The problem? When those dryers aged, tiny asbestos fibers flaked off and got blown directly into your face, your lungs, your morning routine. It wasn't just one brand either. Dozens of home and professional models used asbestos as a standard feature. Hairstylists and home users alike were unknowingly breathing in microscopic danger with every frizz-fighting blast. By the time regulations caught up, millions of these dryers had already done their damage. Lawsuits followed. Recalls were issued. But the damage was done. Today's hair dryers might fry your bangs, but at least they won't coat your lungs with carcinogens. And while those dryers were slowly poisoning you, the next invention had you flying full speed. Riding in the back of pickup trucks was the closest thing to freedom a kid could feel. The air rushed by, whipping your hair and stinging your eyes, and no one cared about seatbelts or safety laws. You could see the whole world from back there: fields, signs, and the occasional bug splatter right to the face. The bed rattled beneath you as your dad took a turn a little too fast, and you grabbed whatever you could: a toolbox, a cooler, or your brother's shirt, to stay upright. Every bump felt like flying, every dip a mini roller coaster. Parents called it fresh air, but really, it was a thrill ride on wheels. You would clouds behind you. Nobody thought twice about it, even on highways. Some folks would wave as they passed, just another family hauling kids and groceries the same way. Looking back, it is hard to believe how normal it felt to risk being thrown onto the road at 60 miles per hour. But in that moment, it was joy, unfiltered and a little reckless. The kind that made childhood feel endless and wild. Aspic molds were the glamorous cousins of Jell-O salad, except they were savory, not sweet. Picture clear gelatin filled with shrimp, boiled eggs, sliced olives, and chopped meat, all arranged like an edible stained glass window. The 1960s were fascinated by food that looked as impressive as it was impractical, and aspic molds became the ultimate showpiece. Magazines called them dinner sculptures, a phrase that sounded much more appetizing than the reality of cold, jellied chicken. Hostesses spent hours pouring broth-based gelatin into copper molds, carefully layering ingredients to get that perfect suspended look. When unmolded, the dish shimmered under the dining room lights, elegant and eerie all at once. It was considered high society dining, proof that your kitchen was as modern as your television set. But under the beauty lay a texture that most guests struggled to love: slippery, rubbery, and oddly meaty. Many recipes came straight from corporate test kitchens, where presentation trumped taste. Today, aspic molds are museum-worthy curiosities, the edible art projects that time forgot. Roman candles were never meant to be handheld, but that did not stop kids from treating them like dueling pistols. You would light one, point it at your buddy across the street, and fire glowing balls of fire into the darkness like it was some kind of space war. No eye protection, no gloves, just you, a shirt from Sears, and a firework that could sear your eyebrows off. Some kids tried to be. The only rule was, do not flinch. You knew it was over when someone got burned and ran home crying, or worse, when a parent came outside and started yelling. Sometimes kids wore sunglasses like they were safety goggles, which did nothing. and everyone smelled like burnt hair and bravery afterward. This was not a one-time stunt. This was a seasonal event. Birthday parties, holidays, or just a boring Tuesday. If someone had Roman candles, it was game on. You laughed, you screamed, you sometimes caught fire, but nobody stopped until the box was empty or the cops showed up. Today, holding fireworks is illegal in most states. Back then, it was just called being a kid. In the summer heat, the playground became a battlefield of burns, bruises, and broken bones. Every kid knew the drill. Wait until after lunch if you want to slide without peeling the skin off your legs. The metal slides shimmered under the sun like molten silver, monkey bars baked in the open air, and we, sunburnt, barefoot, and fearless, climbed them anyway. Safety padding? Forget it. The ground was either concrete or jagged mulch, neither of which forgave a fall. You would climb up a steel dome, lose your grip, and come crashing down like a rag doll. But we kept going back, because danger was part of the thrill. Metal playgrounds were iconic. They were art installations of childhood risk. No one questioned the burn marks on our thighs or the occasional bloodied elbow. It was just what happened at recess. We learned toughness, but at what cost? When plastic playgrounds started replacing them in the 1990s, it felt like something sacred was disappearing. But maybe it was a blessing in disguise. Fewer injuries, less screaming, more sense. Yet every time I pass one of those new, rounded play sets, I can still feel the sting of burning metal under the sun and the weird, wild freedom it gave us. Raw milk mac and cheese, as it was known in households that still kept close ties to farm traditions, came straight from the source, literally. Families who owned cows or had access to unpasteurized dairy often used it without hesitation, trusting in generations of experience over modern regulation. The flavor was richer, the texture silkier, and many swore it made boxed versions taste like warm glue. Preparation was straightforward but hearty. Elbow macaroni boiled until just tender, drenched in a sauce made from raw milk, butter, and a hefty helping of cheddar, often aged right in the root cellar. The dish was baked until golden on top, bubbling with rustic pride and, well, a touch of microbial risk. Raw milk itself wasn't illegal in most places then, but it began facing tighter scrutiny as studies linked unpasteurized dairy to outbreaks of E. coli, listeria, and salmonella. By the late 80s and early 90s, federal agencies clamped down hard, limiting interstate sales and triggering a cascade of state-level bans. Smoking in a plane, for instance, is an action that really gets your danger warnings blaring. When you book a flight these days, you might think that a ride through the skies with full autonomy and privacy is something preserved tightly for the rich people who can smoke in first class. While not entirely the same, back in the 1970s at least, the people back in economy could still enjoy a puff to pass the time while they flew around. You would be surprised at how usual it was for people to smoke on planes. We know your first thought might be, but what about the kids? And long story short, most of them just dealt with it, and people were considerate enough to be mindful of them. Definitely something that spiced up those dull plane rides through blue horizons, but it makes sense why we cannot do stuff like this anymore, given the safety risks on planes and to other passengers. Imagine triggering someone's asthma 10,000 feet up in the sky because you could not go a few hours without your nicotine hit. Asbestos ironing board pads were sold as the safe, high-tech solution for smooth shirts and crisp collars. Heat-resistant, durable, and perfect for avoiding scorched fabrics, they were hailed as a homemaker's dream. But underneath that calm surface, danger was woven right in. Each time you pressed your iron down, tiny asbestos fibers could rise up like invisible ghosts and float through the air, just waiting to be inhaled. Back then, asbestos was everywhere. Floor tiles, insulation, and yes, even the place where you laid your dress shirts. These ironing pads didn't just survive heat, they absorbed it, radiated it, and spread microscopic fibers every time they cracked or frayed. The scary part? No one knew. People used them for years, pressing garment after garment, slowly breathing in particles that would later be linked to serious illnesses. It was domestic life disguised as risk management. And there was no warning label, no raised eyebrow at the store. Some hazards were sweet, powdery, and sold right next to the gumdrops, like tiny, sugary sticks that made smoking look cool before you could even spell nicotine. Long before infant acetaminophen existed, mothers kept a small brown bottle of paregoric on the shelf beside the baby formula. It was a camphorated tincture of opium containing morphine, anise oil, and benzoic acid, and it was sold without a prescription in pharmacies across the country. Doctors recommended it for teething pain, infant colic, diarrhea, and fussy sleeping. The dosage instructions printed right on the label included infants as young as 5 days old. A single ounce contained roughly 13 milligrams of morphine. Parents rubbed it on swollen gums, mixed it into bottles, and spooned it directly into tiny mouths without a second thought, because their own pediatrician had told them to. It took until 1970 for the federal government to reclassify paregoric under the Controlled Substances Act, finally requiring a prescription. By then, generations of American babies had been dosed with opium before they could walk. Lead-glazed ceramic crockpots were the crown jewels of 1970s kitchens, sitting proudly on countertops with their earthy brown tones and hand-painted floral patterns that made every slow-cooked meal feel like a labor of love. Families trusted these heavy stoneware pots completely, filling them with stews and roasts that simmered for hours, while the house filled with comforting aromas. The glazes that made these pots so beautiful were often mixed with lead compounds that gave them their rich, glossy finish, and nobody questioned what might be seeping into the food during those long cooking sessions. Mothers stirred soups, tasted broths straight from the pot, and served meals to children who had no idea that the glaze making everything look so appetizing was slowly contaminating every bite. It took years before researchers connected decorative cookware to elevated lead levels in families who used them regularly. When the bans finally arrived, people were stunned to learn that something so wholesome had been quietly poisoning dinners for years. Those beautiful pots now sit in antique shops as reminders of a time when nobody thought twice about what their cookware might be hiding. Lead-based house paint was once the gold standard for any home improvement project, brushed onto walls, windowsills, cribs, and trim with complete confidence in the 1970s. Parents painted nurseries in cheerful colors, never suspecting that every coat was layering invisible danger onto surfaces their children would soon touch and chew. The paint dried smooth, lasted for years, and seemed like the smartest choice for families on a budget. Hardware stores stocked it proudly because it covered better and lasted longer than cheaper alternatives. What nobody understood was how lead dust accumulated silently in carpets, on toys, and inside tiny lungs. Children crawled across freshly painted floors, pressed their faces against brightly colored walls, and put painted blocks straight into their mouths. The damage built up invisibly until years later when learning difficulties and developmental delays surfaced in classrooms across the country. When researchers traced the pattern back to household paint, regulations followed swiftly, banning lead from residential paint and forcing families to confront what had been hiding in their walls. Ungrounded two-prong electrical outlets were installed in every room of every home without anyone thinking twice. Electricians wired entire houses this way, and families plugged in lamps, televisions, and appliances without imagining any risk. The outlets looked simple and clean, and that simplicity felt safe. But these outlets lacked a grounding wire, the critical safety feature that redirects stray electrical current away from appliances and human bodies. When something shorted inside an appliance or moisture crept into a plug, electricity had nowhere safe to go. People received shocks reaching for toasters, touching lamp switches, or unplugging cords from damp bathroom walls. Fires started silently behind walls where overloaded circuits sparked against wood framing. Investigators traced countless fires and electrocution deaths back to these outlets. When building codes caught up, regulators required grounded three-prong systems in new construction and demanded upgrades in older homes. Families realized the outlets they trusted for decades were quiet hazards hiding behind every faceplate. It is a sobering reminder that familiar parts of a house can carry dangers nobody sees until tragedy strikes. The Fisher-Price roller skates of the 1980s were a rite of passage and a recipe for disaster. Marketed as beginner-friendly, they strapped right over your sneakers with plastic clips and offered no ankle support, no control, and absolutely no brakes. You'd take 2 steps and feel like a baby giraffe on ice. Once those wheels started rolling, good luck stopping unless you hit a patch of grass or a parked car. The plastic wheels were rock hard, the straps barely held, and the only safety feature was your mom yelling from the porch. Every sidewalk crack became a personal lawsuit waiting to happen. Knees were scraped, elbows were bruised, and somehow that just made them cooler. You'd decorate them with stickers, wear them inside the house, and attempt jumps off the curb that nearly ended your career before it began. Manufacturers added brakes, padding, and adjustable sizing. But the original no-brake rockets? Banned, recalled, and memorialized in every scraped knee photo from your childhood. If you skated too far from home, you might have run into someone carrying the next banned item, something that looked a little too real. Before safety regulations, station wagons were rolling playgrounds. Kids piled in the back, surrounded by groceries, coolers, and luggage, and nobody thought twice about buckling up. Half the fun was standing on the seat when your dad hit the gas, pretending you were surfing across the highway. You would slide from one side of the bench to the other during turns, squealing and laughing while your mom yelled, "Sit down before you fly out the window." Long trips meant snacks spilling everywhere, and kids sprawled out in sleeping bags as if the back seat was a hotel room on wheels. You could crawl from the back seat to the front without anyone caring, sliding across vinyl seats that squeaked under your shorts. Some cars even had those backward-facing seats, perfect for waving at drivers behind you or making faces at them until your mom turned around to yell. Long trips felt like adventures, complete with makeshift beds made from pillows and jackets. If the car stopped suddenly, you might roll right into the front seat, but that was part of the fun. Parents smoked, passed snacks, and turned up the radio while kids fought over who got the window seat. You learned balance by surviving sharp turns and sudden stops. Looking back, it was complete madness, a family-sized metal rocket barreling down the road with zero restraints. But at the time, it was normal, even comforting. No one worried about seatbelts because freedom and trust rode right alongside us, humming with the engine as the miles flew by. Jell-O salad with vegetables was the kind of dish that could only have been born in the 1960s. Bright, bold, and just a little bit questionable. Imagine opening a mold of shimmering lime gelatin, only to find carrots, celery, and olives suspended like strange artifacts inside. It was supposed to be refreshing and modern, a way to make vegetables exciting through the magic of gelatin. Cookbooks of the time called it the perfect blend of color and nutrition, and housewives proudly brought it to potlucks with smiles that masked quiet doubt. In truth, no one really knew whether to serve it with dinner or dessert. Some versions even included tuna or shrimp for extra salad appeal, which made things even more confusing. The idea was that gelatin could make any food look sophisticated, smooth, glossy, futuristic. At a time when kitchens were obsessed with convenience and flair, this wobbly creation fit right in. But for all its sparkle, it rarely tasted as good as it looked. One wrong combination of flavors, and you had a disaster encased in lime green. Today, it stands as one of the strangest culinary experiments of the decade, a reminder that not everything that jiggles belongs on a plate. If you were a kid in the 1970s, you probably inhaled a chemical cloud thick enough to kill a small army of bugs, and you did it on purpose. Mosquito fog trucks would roll slowly through neighborhoods, spraying a dense, white mist of DDT or other pesticides. And kids? We chased it. We thought it was magical, like a mobile haunted house. You would sprint through the fog with your friends, laughing, coughing, and pretending to be ghosts. No one questioned it. No one stopped you. Your parents waved from the porch like you were just playing tag in a fog machine of doom. You smelled like chemicals for hours afterward and thought it was cool. And yes, people absolutely cheered when the truck came around. At the time, nobody talked about cancer risk or lung damage. The government said it was safe, so we believed it. The fog smelled weird but harmless. It left your hair sticky, your clothes damp. But the thrill? Unbeatable. Later, when people realized what DDT actually did, the practice was phased out and banned in many areas. But for a while there, we were running through poison clouds like it was Disneyland on wheels. No helmets, no warnings, just straight-up pesticide tag. There was a time when your favorite toy could slowly poison you, and no one would notice. In the 1980s, imported toys often came with bright, beautiful paint jobs, reds that popped, blues that dazzled, but hidden inside those vivid colors was something sinister: lead. It was cheap, it made paint stick better, and it was extremely toxic. But kids were never warned. We chewed on toy soldiers, sucked on painted blocks, dragged colorful trains across our faces like makeup. The effects were silent: developmental issues, learning problems, behavioral shifts, all masked as childhood quirks. Parents had no idea. Companies did not test properly. Regulations were decades behind science. And by the time lead paint was officially recognized as a health crisis, generations had already been exposed. It hit lower-income families the hardest, those who bought discount toys from questionable sources or inherited older items passed down through cousins. With each chipped paint flake, we got a little closer to harm. Lead-based toys were not just a health hazard. They were a betrayal of trust. The kind that lingers decades later every time someone says, "They don't make toys like they used to." Maybe that is a good thing. It started with a sizzle and ended with a federal warning. In the mid-1980s, blackened redfish Cajun style wasn't just a dinner, it was a full-blown culinary event. Thanks to celebrity chef Paul Prudhomme, this fiery, spice-rubbed dish exploded in popularity across America, lighting up steakhouses and backyard grills alike. Redfish, or red drum, went from a Gulf Coast staple to a national obsession almost overnight. The fish was dredged in a bold blend of cayenne, paprika, thyme, and garlic powder, then seared in a red-hot cast-iron skillet until it crackled like fireworks on the 4th of July. Before the craze, redfish was largely overlooked outside the South. It was cheap, abundant, and often caught for local consumption. But once the blackened technique hit TV and magazine covers, commercial demand surged. Restaurants couldn't get enough. Neither could diners. By 1986, redfish was being pulled from the Gulf at unsustainable rates, leading to a collapse in population. The government stepped in, placing it under federal protection and banning commercial harvests in many states. Today, you can still find redfish on menus, but it's usually farm-raised or strictly regulated. Speaking of smoking, another crowd that would unwind via substances were pregnant women drinking and smoking. Today, pregnant women are not just discouraged from smoking or drinking, rather they are medically bound not to do so. In the wild times of the 1970s, however, it was a common misconception amongst people that these actions did no harm to the baby. You may wonder why people did not just realize this was a bad idea if they had any concern about the health of a soon-to-be-born baby, but pregnancy can be stressful, and women had to cut back on the migraines somehow. Smoking and consuming wine was how a lot of them coped and unwound in their private time. Naturally, as anti-smoking campaigns picked up an aggressive speed in America and an entire generation grew up with them, these ideas of relaxation thankfully went away from the public's mind. Candy cigarettes were a sugar-coated pipeline to adult bad habits. They came in little cardboard boxes that looked exactly like the real thing, filtered, flip-top, even with red tips to mimic a burning end. You'd pull one out, tap it against your hand like you'd seen in movies, and blow out a puff of cornstarch smoke that made you feel like the coolest kid on the block. They were sweet, chalky, and totally addictive, in flavor and in fantasy. For kids, they weren't just candy, they were props. You could strut around pretending to light up with confidence, then crunch it down in a few bites. Parents mostly shrugged. After all, it was just sugar, right? But looking back, these treats weren't as innocent as they seemed. The candy industry leaned into the trend with flashy packaging and even cartoon mascots, as if every 7-year-old needed their own pack of pretend smokes. But while candy cigarettes were bad enough, things got even more blatant once actual cigarette brands wormed their way into children's programming with smooth voices, catchy jingles, and cartoon cowboys who sold more than just action. Your mother's obstetrician may have told her to smoke. That is not an exaggeration. Throughout the 1960s, doctors advised pregnant women that a cigarette could calm their nerves, ease nausea, and help control excessive weight gain. Tobacco companies ran advertisements featuring physicians in white coats endorsing specific brands, and medical journals accepted full-page ads from cigarette manufacturers without hesitation. The 1964 Surgeon General's report linked smoking to lung cancer, but said almost nothing about pregnancy. Hospitals had ashtrays in maternity wards. Nurses smoked at their stations. Millions of women smoked through all 9 months because the person they trusted most, their doctor, never told them to stop. Aluminum pressure cookers without safety valves were the time-saving heroes of busy 1970s households, promising to turn tough cuts of meat into tender masterpieces in a fraction of the usual time. Families gathered around these hissing, steaming pots with a mixture of excitement and anticipation, watching the pressure gauge climb while dinner transformed inside. The problem was that early models had no reliable way to release excess pressure when things went wrong. One moment you had a pot roast cooking peacefully, and the next moment the lid could launch toward the ceiling with enough force to dent plaster or worse. Kitchens across America experienced explosions that sent scalding food and metal fragments flying in every direction, leaving burns and injuries in their wake. Parents who had proudly shown off their modern cooking technology suddenly found themselves explaining to emergency room doctors how dinner ended up embedded in the walls. When safety standards finally caught up, regulators demanded multiple release mechanisms that made the older models illegal to sell. Those unregulated cookers became cautionary tales about speed and convenience coming at the cost of basic protection. Lawn darts with metal tips were the crown jewels of backyard entertainment in the 1970s, heavy enough to arc through the summer sky and sharp enough to stick firmly into grass with a satisfying thud. Families gathered outside after cookouts, tossing these weighted missiles toward plastic rings, while children ran barefoot through the yard, chasing fireflies and waiting for their turn. The game felt thrilling because the darts had real weight, real force, and real consequences if someone misjudged a throw. Parents saw it as harmless outdoor fun, the kind of activity that got kids away from the television and into the fresh air where they belonged. But the injuries began mounting, and they were not minor scrapes or bruises. Emergency rooms reported puncture wounds, skull fractures, and tragedies that turned sunny afternoons into nightmares. Children were struck while playing nearby, unaware that a dart was spiraling toward them from across the yard. When regulators finally stepped in, the ban came with undeniable urgency. These toys became symbols of a decade that underestimated how quickly fun could turn fatal when sharp metal met soft skin. Kerosene space heaters without venting were a lifeline for families saving money during cold winters in the 1970s. People placed them in living rooms, bedrooms, and basements, watching the warm glow spread across the floor as the chill faded. The heaters felt practical and efficient, a quick solution when central heating could not keep up or when the oil bill climbed too high. Families gathered around them the way they might gather around a fireplace, trusting the warmth completely. But these heaters burned fuel indoors without any exhaust system, quietly releasing carbon monoxide and nitrogen dioxide directly into the air. In tightly sealed homes, the buildup could become deadly within hours. Some families went to sleep warm and never woke up, while others suffered headaches and confusion they could not explain. When investigators traced deaths to unvented kerosene heaters, regulators moved to ban the most dangerous models entirely. Families who relied on them for years were stunned to learn how close they had come to tragedy. Today, only properly vented heaters are allowed, but the memory of those silent dangers lingers. Toy guns in the 1980s were practically indistinguishable from the real thing. Made with black plastic, realistic shapes, and even working triggers, they had the look and feel of something that should have been locked in a police evidence room. Just a solid chunk of molded chaos that turned playground games into potential panic zones. You'd see kids walking down the street brandishing these things, twirling them like action stars, and every adult in the vicinity would freeze. Police departments issued warnings. Tragic accidents occurred when officers couldn't tell if it was a toy or the real deal. But the toy industry kept churning them out, fueled by action movies, war games, and every kid's dream of being the next big hero. It wasn't until a few high-profile cases made national headlines that things finally changed. New laws came in fast, orange tips became mandatory, and ultra-realistic models were pulled from shelves. Today, toy weapons come in neon pink with Super Blaster written on the side. Speaking of dangerous things that glowed in the dark, let's talk about what used to light up your bedroom walls: radioactive style. There was a time when helmets were for daredevils and professional racers, not neighborhood kids. Riding without helmets was a badge of honor, a declaration of bravery that everyone understood. The wind felt faster, louder, sharper when it hit your bare head, and that was part of the thrill. You were not just riding a bike, you were conquering the world, one cracked sidewalk at a time. Sure, you fell sometimes, scraped knees, bloody elbows, maybe a scar or two that stayed for years. But those scars were trophies, proof that you were tough enough to ride again the next day. Parents barely blinked. A rinse with a garden hose and a bandage were the only first aid required. And if your chain came loose mid-ride, you fixed it by flipping the bike upside down and spinning the pedals until it caught again, hands covered in grease, mind full of pride. The danger was part of the fun, that rush of control and chaos mixed together. These days, helmets are mandatory, and kids ride smooth, quiet, and safe. But back then, we preferred the noise of the wind in our ears and the feeling that nothing could stop us, not even gravity. The Vienna sausage gelatin ring might just be the crown jewel of 1960s party horror. This masterpiece of ambition featured canned Vienna sausages floating in a translucent ring of savory gelatin, usually flavored with tomato or beef broth. It was often garnished with hard-boiled eggs or parsley sprigs for decoration. It was a centerpiece meant to impress, a conversation starter no one actually wanted to eat. The recipe promised elegance in a single mold, but one look at those little sausages encased in wobbling jelly told another story. This dish was born from America's obsession with efficiency and canned foods. If it came in a tin, it was modern, clean, and somehow patriotic. Housewives who served it did so with pride, even as guests politely pushed it to the edge of their plates. The gelatin ring was chilled to perfection and sliced like a cake, often served with crackers or a questionable mayonnaise-based sauce. Today, it's hard not to marvel at how such a strange concoction ever made its way to the dinner table. The Vienna sausage ring was both a product and a parody of its time. Proof that in the 1960s, presentation was everything, even when taste was nowhere to be found. Before skate parks, before helmets were required, and before anyone cared about safety, there were bike ramps, hand-built death traps made of old plywood and 2 cinder blocks you stole from behind your neighbor's shed. You would set it up in the street, no measurements, no testing, just vibes. Then you would fly down the sidewalk full speed, hit the ramp, and pray. Inspired by Evel Knievel and too many cartoons, every kid thought they were destined for greatness. Most ended up with scrapes, bruises, or a broken wrist. Some ramps cracked in half as soon as you hit them. Others flipped backward and took your front tire with them. And if you made it over, you cheered like you landed on the moon. We called it airtime, even if you only left the ground for half a second. And landing was never soft. It was always gravel, driveway, or the curb. Kids lined up to take their turn, even after watching someone go airborne and land on their ribs. You did not back out. That was worse than falling. You dusted off, spit out the blood, and got back in line. Today, playgrounds are rubber-padded and rated for safety. Back then, we had gravity, plywood, and blind confidence. Cabbage Patch Kids were already a phenomenon. Parents fought over them in store aisles. Kids carried them everywhere like tiny best friends. But then came the snack time edition, and things got weird. This doll could eat plastic snacks that came with it. The food disappeared into its mouth, never to be seen again. It was battery-powered and had mechanical jaws that chewed non-stop. No off switch, no pause. Just a quiet hum and a relentless bite. The idea was magical, a doll that could pretend to eat like a real child, until it started chewing things it was never meant to. Kids' fingers, ponytails, loose sleeves. The doll did not discriminate. If it could fit in its mouth, it was fair game. And once it started chewing, it would not stop. Parents frantically tried to pull their children free. Hair was yanked out, skin was bruised. Some injuries were minor, others were not. The manufacturer eventually issued a recall, but the damage had been done. The snack time Cabbage Patch Kid had crossed a line, turning from a comforting friend into a little plastic monster. And it was sold as a holiday toy, a gift, a joy. What it really taught us was that even innocence could have teeth. Sometimes danger wears a smile and comes in a box with a bow. Before it was a symbol of elegance gliding across royal ponds, the swan was, believe it or not, dinner in some American households. Swan pot pie might sound like something out of a medieval banquet, but even into the early 1980s, it wasn't unheard of in remote areas of Alaska and rural parts of the Midwest. These weren't decorative birds borrowed from a castle moat. They were wild trumpeter swans, hunted during specific seasons for their large, gamey breasts and legs, especially by subsistence hunters where food variety was limited and winters were long. The preparation wasn't unlike other wild game pies. The meat was slow-cooked to tenderize its dense texture, often stewed with carrots, potatoes, onions, and thickened with a roux before being baked under a buttery crust. It was hearty, filling, and, depending on who made it, either unforgettable or something you never spoke of again. Federal protection laws had technically existed since the early 20th century under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but enforcement was lax, especially in isolated regions where traditional practices lingered. That changed as trumpeter swan populations hit dangerously low numbers. You might have heard your elders going on and on about how back in their day, kids would just go out and play in the streets instead of being glued to screens all day. Sorry to burst your bubble, but there is a lot of truth to that, and parents were significantly more carefree with letting their kids from the house in the neighborhood. Friends who would usually be the neighbor's kids was a common hobby. Kids grew up that way, and a lot of parents thought it helped keep them active and social, but they did not consider how it essentially exposed them to the unpredictable outside world. With literally no supervision, the next time your parents say something like that, maybe ask them about some horror stories they may have heard. With more incidents of children being exposed to sexual assault crimes or violence or cases of kidnapping, curfews definitely got tighter. In the 1960s, cigarette ads didn't stop at magazines or adult TV shows. They showed up in cartoons and kids' programming, pitched by smiling doctors, dashing cowboys, and yes, even animated animals. Picture this. Your Saturday morning lineup is rolling, and between episodes of your favorite show, a cartoon camel struts across the screen, puffing away like it's the key to happiness. It wasn't subtle. These ads were bold, colorful, and carefully designed to stick in a kid's brain like bubblegum on a shoe. The message? Smoking was cool. Smoking was grown up. Smoking was what heroes did. The Marlboro Man became a cultural icon, and animated ads blurred the line between fiction and influence. Brands knew what they were doing. They targeted younger audiences with catchy jingles and slogans that wormed their way into schoolyard chatter. Even educational shows sometimes had ad slots sandwiched in that glamorized smoking without a hint of warning. And just when you thought that was the low point, someone thought it would be funny to actually sell a toy that involved broken glass in a bag. Yes, seriously. In 1960, the FDA approved Obitrol, a capsule containing a mixture of amphetamine salts, including methamphetamine, as a prescription treatment for obesity. Doctors handed it to housewives the way they handed out aspirin. But the real madness was the rainbow pills. Patients walked into specialized obesity clinics and left with a personalized cocktail of brightly colored capsules, amphetamines to kill the appetite, thyroid hormone to accelerate metabolism, digitalis to increase heart rate, barbiturates to offset the jitters, and laxatives to flush everything through. One dispensing diet doctor paid $71 for 100,000 amphetamine tablets and sold them for $12,000. By 1962, American pharmaceutical companies were producing 8 billion amphetamine tablets per year. The weight came off. So did years of cardiac health. The Controlled Substances Act of 1971 finally slowed the pipeline, but not before an entire generation of women had been chemically wired to a scale. Teflon-coated pans with PFOA felt like pure kitchen magic when they first appeared in 1970s homes, promising that eggs would slide effortlessly and cleanup would take seconds instead of endless scrubbing. Families marveled at how nothing stuck to these miracle surfaces, tossing away their old cast iron in favor of something that seemed too good to be true. And in many ways, it was. The chemical compound that made these pans so slick released toxic fumes when the coating overheated, which happened more easily than most cooks realized. Birds in kitchens died suddenly from the invisible gases, and people reported flu-like symptoms after cooking sessions that pushed these pans past their limits. Nobody thought to question why a cooking surface could kill a parakeet nearby, because the convenience was simply too appealing to resist. It took decades before researchers understood how these forever chemicals accumulated in the body and refused to break down. When regulators finally stepped in, the original formulations were banned. But the memory of those early pans lingers uncomfortably for anyone who spent years breathing in fumes they never knew existed. Baby walkers with unrestricted wheels were marketed as essential tools for helping infants learn to stand and move on their own in the 1970s. Parents loved them because they kept babies entertained and seemingly safe while dinner was being prepared. The walkers rolled smoothly across kitchen floors and living room carpets, giving babies a taste of independence before they could even crawl properly. Advertisements showed smiling infants gliding happily from room to room, and pediatricians rarely warned against them because the dangers had not yet been documented. But homes in that era were full of hazards that walkers made worse. Staircases sat open without gates, thresholds created unexpected drops, and the wheels moved faster than any parent could react. Babies rolled toward basement steps, tumbled down flights of stairs, and crashed into sharp furniture corners before anyone could reach them. The injuries were devastating, often involving head trauma that left lasting damage. When researchers connected walker design to emergency room visits, regulations tightened and the original models disappeared from shelves. Chlordane foundation treatment was sprayed around the perimeters of homes throughout the 1970s as the ultimate defense against termites. Pest control companies promised long-lasting protection, and homeowners gladly paid to keep their wooden structures safe from insects that could hollow out a house from inside. The chemicals soaked into soil, seeped into basement walls, and created a barrier meant to last for decades. And it did last, but not the way anyone expected. Chlordane never broke down. It lingered in the ground, drifted into basements as vapor, and contaminated air inside homes for years after application. Families breathed it without knowing, and researchers linked the chemical to liver damage, neurological problems, and cancer. Some homes became so contaminated they were declared uninhabitable, their foundations permanently poisoned. When regulators banned Chlordane, the announcement came with grim recognition that cleanup was nearly impossible. Families who thought they were protecting their homes discovered they had invited a chemical guest that refused to leave. The soil around their foundations remained toxic long after anyone remembered the original treatment. Glow-in-the-dark stickers in the 1980s were the ultimate bedroom accessory. Stars, moons, alien decals. You'd slap them all over your ceiling and bask in the celestial glow every night. But here's the fun part. Some of them were literally radioactive. To get that long-lasting shine, certain manufacturers used phosphorescent paint that contained trace amounts of radium or tritium, materials that should have come with a Geiger counter, not a sheet of stickers. Sure, it looked magical at bedtime, but it was emitting low levels of radiation while you slept 2 feet below it. Parents had no clue. Kids loved it. And meanwhile, your space room was quietly setting off alarm bells in a future safety inspector's mind. As awareness of radiation risks grew, these glow-in-the-dark paints were pulled off the market or reformulated with safer alternatives. But the damage? Already done in bedrooms across the country. While that glow was subtle, the next invention didn't mess around. It promised to melt fat with the power of electricity. Every neighborhood had one. The infamous homemade ramp built from spare wood and wishful thinking. A few bricks, an old plank, maybe some nails if you were lucky. And suddenly, you had your own Evel Knievel stunt course. Someone always had the big bike, the one with slightly better tires, and they'd volunteer as tribute to go first. Kids would cheer, betting how far they'd fly before gravity won, while someone's little brother filmed it on a clunky camcorder. When the ramp inevitably collapsed, it was less of a disaster and more of a neighborhood event. A collective gasp, followed by roaring laughter. Kids lined up to take turns flying off it, testing gravity and judgment at the same time. Half the fun was the anticipation. That moment before your tires hit the ramp and you wondered, is this the time it breaks? Spoiler alert. Sometimes it did. But the pain was worth it. A few scrapes, maybe a busted knee, and a story to brag about for weeks. Looking back, sophisticated seafood for the modern hostess. But most people described it as, why is it cold? The mousse was meant to be served as a dip with crackers, its creamy, fishy flavor hiding behind the illusion of elegance. Guests pretended to enjoy it because that was what good manners required, though the smell alone could test anyone's resolve. Still, in an era obsessed with molded foods, it checked every box: color, convenience, and novelty. The fish mold itself became a cultural icon, seen in kitchens across suburbia. Some hostesses even added food coloring to make it ocean pink. Today, molded tuna mousse remains one of the most infamous dishes of the 1960s, a nostalgic reminder of a time when ambition, not appetite, ruled the dinner table. It started slow, literally. Someone would lie down on the hood of a car and someone else would drive, carefully, supposedly. You clung to the windshield wipers like they were handles on a roller coaster and shouted directions like you were in a Hollywood chase scene. The driver did 5 miles per hour tops, but when you are 10 years old and flat on the hood of a Buick, it feels like a rocket launch. Every bump in the road felt like a jump. Every turn sent you sliding. And if the driver hit the brakes, you better have a good grip or be good at tucking and rolling. It was part thrill ride, part trust fall. And somehow, it was a regular Saturday thing. You would take turns, lying on the hood while your buddy drove around the block. Sometimes you waved at neighbors like you were in a parade. Other times you just screamed. No helmets, no adult supervision, just a full-body windshield dive waiting to happen. Today, this would land you in a hospital or a court case. Back then, it was just called hanging out. The car was your theme park, and the street was your racetrack. We did not have seat belts. We were the bumper. There was nothing quite like running full speed across your backyard and hurling yourself headfirst onto a wet sheet of plastic. The slip and slide was a symbol of childhood joy, until it was not. The idea seemed simple. Spray some water, roll out the slide, and dive. But no one ever talked about the cracked ribs, or the neck injuries, or the kids who slammed into the ground like human missiles, because the slide was only as safe as the ground underneath it. Uneven lawns, rocks hiding under the surface, tree roots waiting like traps. And if you were a teenager, or worse, an adult, your weight turned every dive into a high-velocity disaster. The company even had to issue warnings not to let older kids use it. But that came later. In the 1980s, everyone dove. No helmets, no supervision, just laughter and the occasional scream. Hospitals saw a surge in summertime injuries tied directly to these plastic torpedoes. But still, every kid wanted one. It was cheaper than a pool and promised the thrill of reckless speed. You did not care about the bruises until the next day. You just wanted to fly. Looking back, it feels like we turned backyards into danger zones on purpose, and we loved every second of it. Back when soda fountains were still fixtures in small-town diners and homemade concoctions ruled summer afternoons, the sassafras root beer float was a frothy, nostalgic treat with deep roots, literally. Long before mass-market sodas took over, root beer was brewed at home using sassafras bark or root, often simmered with molasses, wintergreen, and a pinch of yeast to give it that fizzy edge. Add a scoop of vanilla ice cream, and you had a creamy spiced float that tasted like the woods met the county fair. Sassafras had been a staple in American kitchens for centuries, used by Native Americans medicinally, adopted by early settlers for teas and tonics, and later embraced by soda makers for its distinct, earthy flavor. It was considered both a comfort and a cure-all, and it found its way into everything from jelly to homemade liquor. But in 1960, the FDA dropped a bombshell. Safrole, the primary compound in sassafras oil, was found to cause liver damage and cancer in lab animals. While many companies switched to artificial flavoring immediately, small batch brewers and home cooks continued using the natural stuff well into the 1980s, unaware or unconcerned. On the topic of parents, in a lot of states in the USA, it was common to sit on your mom or dad's lap while they drove you to school or picked you up and maybe take the wheel for a bit. The thought process behind this one was basically just, they are going to be driving someday, so why not start them early? It's best to get them accustomed to the road and the driver's seat while puberty sets in, you know? Unfortunately, part of how the world can defy your expectations is how quickly something can happen on the road. You would genuinely be surprised at how many car accidents were caused by kids just taking the wheel for a few seconds. One inattentive driver here, another overly excited kid there, and you had the recipe for a car wreck. This fairly risky public habit is something we can happily say is better off not ever being a valid idea again. The bag of glass toy kit was one of those ideas that sounds like a joke, because it kind of was, but somehow ended up on actual store shelves. Inspired by a sketch from a comedy show, it became a bizarre reality thanks to novelty companies that took the joke way too far. Inside the package? A small clear bag filled with sharp-edged plastic shards that looked, and in some cases felt, a whole lot like real broken glass. Some versions were labeled as safe plastic, but others? Not so much. The idea was that kids could pretend to play with shattered glass as a prank or just for laughs. But what could possibly go wrong, right? Tiny cuts, choking hazards, or just the sheer confusion of teaching kids that handling jagged shards was entertainment. Parents were either horrified or totally unfazed, depending on their sense of humor. The product didn't last long, and while this prank kit was short-lived, plenty of long-term household items were just as risky, like hair dryers with zero insulation and a plug that sparked like a lightning bolt near the sink. Charcoal and Robitussin. AC sat on the same pharmacy shelf as Band-Aids and rubbing alcohol, and they did not require a prescription. These cherry-flavored cough syrups contained codeine, an opioid derived from the same poppy plant as morphine, blended with a generous pour of grain alcohol. When cold season hit a household, parents dosed the entire family from the same bottle, spooning it into children as young as 3 or 4 years old. The codeine suppressed the cough by acting directly on the brain's cough center, and the alcohol ensured that everyone slept deeply whether they needed to or not. Nobody called it what it was: an opioid sedative mixed with liquor, dispensed to minors without medical supervision. It was not until the late 1970s that the FDA began restricting codeine-containing cough preparations, and some formulations remained available without a prescription well into the 1990s. Cadmium-colored enamelware brought a burst of sunshine into 1970s kitchens with its vibrant oranges, fiery reds, and cheerful yellows that made even the simplest cooking tasks feel festive. These bright pots and pans looked stunning hanging from pot racks or sitting on stovetops, their glossy surfaces catching the light and adding warmth to every meal. Families used them daily for boiling pasta, simmering sauces, and warming soups, never imagining that the pigments creating those beautiful colors contained cadmium, a heavy metal with serious health consequences. Every time acidic foods like tomatoes touched these surfaces, tiny amounts of cadmium leached into whatever was being cooked. Children ate from bowls filled with contaminated stews, while parents proudly showed off their colorful kitchen collections. Researchers eventually discovered that cadmium exposure could damage kidneys, weaken bones, and accumulate dangerously over time. The bans arrived swiftly once the evidence became clear, forcing families to discard cookware they had treasured for years. Those cheerful orange pots serve as reminders that the brightest things in our kitchens sometimes carried the darkest secrets. Asbestos hair dryers were marketed as the sleek, modern solution for busy mornings in the 1970s, promising fast drying times and salon-quality results right in your own bathroom. Women held these devices inches from their faces, aiming warm air at damp hair while breathing in whatever drifted through the vents. The dryers hummed reliably, lasted for years, and felt like a small piece of progress in an era obsessed with convenience. Manufacturers used asbestos in the heating elements because the material resisted heat beautifully, never melting no matter how long the dryer ran. But that same heat loosened microscopic fibers that floated invisibly into the air with every use. Families had no idea that something designed to make mornings easier was quietly releasing particles capable of lodging permanently in lung tissue. Researchers later connected asbestos exposure to devastating respiratory diseases, including cancers that appeared decades after initial contact. When the truth emerged, the shock was immediate, because these were everyday tools sitting in bathroom drawers, used by mothers and grandmothers who trusted the brand names on the handles. Hexachlorophene antibacterial soap was marketed as the ultimate protection against germs in the 1970s, sold in pharmacies and grocery stores as something every family needed. Parents used it on children, hospitals used it on newborns, and households kept it beside every sink as a daily defense against illness. The soap promised cleanliness beyond anything ordinary products could deliver, and families trusted that promise completely. But hexachlorophene absorbed through skin far more easily than anyone realized, especially in infants whose systems could not handle the chemical load. Reports surfaced of babies developing brain damage after repeated baths with products containing the compound. The connection was devastating. Something meant to protect the most vulnerable was causing irreversible harm. Regulators moved quickly once evidence became clear, banning hexachlorophene from over-the-counter products and restricting its use to prescription settings. Families who had scrubbed their children with this soap every day were horrified to learn what they had done. It remains one of the most painful examples of how a product marketed as safe can carry consequences no parent imagined. Mercury-filled maze toys were the kind of item you now see in museum exhibits labeled "Why?" Small handheld games with liquid silver beads that glided through tiny plastic channels, mesmerizing, smooth, and completely toxic. You'd tilt the toy back and forth, guiding the mercury around obstacles like a high-stakes version of Operation. No gloves, no warnings. Just you, the element responsible for Mad Hatter syndrome, and a plastic shell thin enough to crack if you dropped it. These were handed out as party favors and sold at corner stores like they were marbles or gumballs. Toddlers chewed on them. Older kids smashed them open just to play with the shimmering silver liquid inside. It wasn't until researchers started speaking out and horror stories surfaced that these toys were finally yanked from shelves. Today, anything involving mercury is locked behind hazmat labels and biohazard warnings. But in the 1980s, it was just another shiny toy in the toy chest. And while we are at hazardous, nothing was more festive or flammable than what kids wore every October. Every 4th of July, neighborhoods turned into amateur battlegrounds. Kids lit bottle rockets from soda bottles, watched them hiss and ducked as they shot off in unpredictable directions. Half the fun was never knowing where they would land. You could feel your heart race as the fuse burned shorter. The bottle would tip at the last second, sending the rocket sideways into chaos, and the night erupted in smoke, laughter, and panic. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, and the sight of sparks against the dark sky felt like magic. Dangerous, beautiful, and absolutely worth the risk. You could hear the whiz and pop echo across streets while laughter followed close behind. Parents stood nearby pretending it was fine, because it was tradition. Loud, smoky, slightly terrifying tradition. Sometimes the bottle tipped, and the rocket blasted sideways into a bush or someone's foot, but nobody stopped. Burned fingers, singed eyebrows, and scorch marks on the driveway were just part of summer. You learned to respect fireworks the hard way, by getting too close at least once. When the smoke cleared, the air smelled like gunpowder and freedom. It was reckless, exciting, and somehow completely normal. Liverloaf was the kind of canned delicacy that 1960s advertising swore would make entertaining effortless. It came neatly packed in a shiny tin, promising rich flavor and European sophistication in a sliceable spread. In reality, it was a smooth, pinkish blend of liver, fat, and mystery seasonings that could turn any party table into a dare. The advertisements were full of smiling hostesses spreading it onto crackers, blissfully unaware of the puzzled expressions it would cause moments later. The taste was iron-heavy and salty, somewhere between meat paste and perfume. Still, it fit perfectly into the era's fascination with canned convenience. No cooking, no mess, just open and serve. Some recipes even suggested shaping it into little rosettes with a piping bag for elegance. Liverloaf lived in the space between luxury and lunacy, the perfect example of mid-century faith in industrial food. It faded quietly as tastes changed, but its memory lingers, proof that not every shortcut to sophistication is worth taking. In the 1970s, swimming hole was code for good luck. You jumped in, no questions asked. Murky water? No problem. Zero visibility? Even better. You ran full speed off a dock or a ledge and launched yourself into brown, mysterious depths like it was the Olympics. There were no lifeguards, no warning signs, just blind courage and peer pressure. Sometimes there were rocks, sometimes there were sunken shopping carts or broken glass. You never knew, and you did not care. If someone else jumped and did not float back up immediately, you all dove in after them, then laughed about it later. We bragged about belly flops that left red marks for days. Someone always came up yelling, "I hit something," but we just shouted, "You're fine." Cuts were rinsed in the same water you got them from. And if it smelled weird or slimy, that was part of the fun. Kids dared each other to do flips, dives, or cannonballs. Belly flops were met with applause or howls of laughter. You came out coughing, bleeding, or with something slimy stuck to your leg. You did not test the water. You tested yourself. The goal was fun, not safety. Today, jumping into water without checking depth is a PSA on every beach. Back then, it was just a summer rite of passage. Broken toes, bruised ribs, maybe a tetanus shot, and somehow, still worth it. Slap bracelets were magic the first time you saw them. Just a flat strip of metal, covered in colorful fabric or vinyl. You straightened it out, slapped it against your wrist, and watched it curl up like a snake hugging your arm. It was fun, it was flashy, and it was everywhere. Kids wore them stacked up to their elbows. They traded them during recess. They used them as pretend weapons, rulers, and fashion statements. But inside that pretty wrapping was a strip of sharp-edged metal, often recycled from old measuring tapes. When the fabric tore, and it always did, you were left with a slicing hazard right on your wrist. Kids got scratched, cut, in some cases even gashed. The injuries started piling up in school nurse offices across the country. Teachers banned them, parents threw them out. But for a while, nothing could stop the slap bracelet craze, because they were cheap, they were fun, and they were addictive. You could hear them echo through hallways with every slap, a sound that became the unofficial anthem of playground chaos. What began as a quirky trend quickly turned into a classroom liability. Slap bracelets were more than just accessories. They were proof that sometimes the most harmless-looking things are hiding a sharp surprise. In hushed corners of upscale kitchens and underground dining circles, a controversial delicacy made its way across the Atlantic and onto select American plates: ortolan songbird pâté. Though never common, it was consumed quietly by culinary thrill-seekers through the 1980s, often behind closed doors and drawn curtains. The ortolan, a tiny migratory bird from Europe, was prepared through a process that would make modern food ethics committees clutch their clipboards. The bird was captured during migration, overfed in the dark to plump it up, then drowned in Armagnac, a detail that sounds more like fiction than tradition. The entire bird, bones and all, was typically roasted and sometimes incorporated into pâté. Consumption often followed an odd ritual. Diners would cover their heads with a cloth, not for modesty, but supposedly to trap the aromas, though many said it was more about hiding the act from God. France banned the practice in the late 90s, but even before then, international conservation groups raised alarm over the ortolan's steep population decline. In the US, restrictions on importing the dish became increasingly strict, citing both animal cruelty and endangered species protections. Similar to the previous entry, and so many more on this list, we have children playing with chemistry sets, which sounds harmless enough in theory. It starts getting anxiety-inducing when you introduce actual harmful chemicals into sets that are marketed towards children. Mind you, most of these were kids who were just beginning to take chemistry in school and had not even fully gone over the periodic table yet. Sure, give them a full chemistry kit with which they can produce hazardous substances because kids are just known for their cautious approach to whatever plaything you give them, right? Sadly, people would learn the hard way how harmful a chemistry class in practice can be. Due to lack of caution taken by companies to advertise the risk of their sets, many people suffered the impact of what they thought was harmless learning. Today, we will not suffer the same fate as consumer laws dictate that any product with chemicals in it should be sold with a safety guideline and warning. Home hair dryers in the 1960s looked like they came straight from a beauty salon, but without any of the safety checks. These early models had bulky hoods or handheld nozzles, often with thick cords that frayed faster than a worn shoelace. You'd plug them into the wall, perch near the bathroom sink, and hope for the best. No ground wires, no insulation. Just you, your wet hair, and a live current a sneeze away from disaster. The metal casing got hot. The motors sparked occasionally. And heaven help you if your fingers were damp. Water plus faulty wiring? That hairdo could turn into a fireworks show. Yet people trusted them because that sleek salon look felt worth the risk. Back then, it was just another day in the name of glamour. But if electricity was playing with fire, what we put directly on wounds wasn't much better, especially when it came in a bright red bottle with a mercury surprise. If the diet pills kept you wired during the day, the barbiturates were supposed to bring you down at night. Phenobarbital was the drug your family doctor prescribed for everything that could not be diagnosed: exam anxiety, wedding day nerves, a rough patch in a marriage, trouble sleeping after a move. It was a powerful central nervous system depressant, a drug now classified as a Schedule IV controlled substance and reserved almost exclusively for epilepsy treatment. But in the 1960s, a general practitioner could write you a prescription in under 2 minutes and send you home with a bottle of 60 tablets. The therapeutic dose and the lethal dose were not far apart, and mixing phenobarbital with alcohol, which millions of Americans did every evening, narrowed that gap to almost nothing. Overdose deaths were so common, they barely made the local papers. Asbestos trivets and potholders were considered the ultimate in kitchen safety during the 1970s, promising to protect countertops and hands from even the hottest pans fresh off the stove. Families stacked them in drawers, hung them beside ovens, and used them daily without giving a single thought to what made these items so remarkably heat-resistant. The answer was asbestos, a mineral fiber that could withstand extreme temperatures but also released microscopic particles into the air with every use. Each time someone grabbed a potholder to lift a casserole or slid a trivet under a sizzling skillet, invisible fibers drifted through the kitchen into the lungs of everyone nearby. Children did homework at kitchen tables while parents cooked dinner inches away from materials now known to cause devastating respiratory diseases. The tragedy is that asbestos felt so safe, so perfectly suited for its purpose that questioning it seemed absurd. When the truth emerged and bans swept through households, people were horrified to realize they had been protecting their hands while slowly harming their lungs. Those trivets became symbols of how easily danger can disguise itself as convenience. Chlorofluorocarbon aerosol sprays were everywhere in the 1970s, hissing out of hairspray cans, deodorant bottles, and cleaning products in kitchens and bathrooms across the country. People loved the convenience of a simple press that delivered a fine mist, whether styling hair before work or freshening up a room before company arrived. The chemical propellants inside made everything feel modern and effortless, a small daily luxury that nobody questioned. Families used these sprays freely, filling enclosed bathrooms with clouds of mist that lingered long after the can was set down. What nobody realized was that each press released compounds capable of drifting upward through the atmosphere and destroying the ozone layer that protected the planet from harmful radiation. Scientists eventually traced a growing hole in the ozone directly to these everyday products sitting under bathroom sinks. The revelation was staggering, because something so ordinary had been quietly contributing to a global environmental crisis. Regulators banned chlorofluorocarbons from consumer products, but the damage to the atmosphere took decades to heal. Lead-glazed ceramic crockpots were treasured kitchen tools in the 1970s, sitting on counters and simmering family meals for hours while parents worked or ran errands. The glazes gave them a beautiful shine that made them look both rustic and refined, perfect for Sunday roasts and holiday gatherings. Families trusted these pots completely, filling them with soups, stews, and slow-cooked meats that fed everyone from toddlers to grandparents. Nobody imagined that the glaze itself was the problem. When acidic foods like tomatoes or wine simmered for hours against the ceramic surface, lead from the glaze leached directly into the meal. Families consumed it bite by bite, year after year, never suspecting that dinner was slowly poisoning them. Children were especially vulnerable, absorbing lead faster than adults and suffering damage that accumulated silently. When researchers tested old crockpots and found alarming lead levels, the warning spread quickly. Regulators banned lead glazes in cookware and urged families to discard anything that could not be verified as safe. It is deeply unsettling to realize that a pot meant to nourish families was quietly contaminating the very meals it prepared. A survival knife modeled after Rambo was just what the 80s kids needed. These blades were mass-produced, slapped with the Sylvester Stallone brand, and sold to kids who still wore Velcro shoes. The blade? Sharp enough to slice through rope. The handle? Hollow, because inside was a survival kit, complete with fishing hooks, wire, matches, and sometimes even a tiny compass that barely worked. It was marketed as a tool for outdoor adventures, but in reality it was just a hunting knife that fit in a backpack. Boys would trade them, show them off at school, or use them in backyard missions where at least one kid came back bleeding. Teachers confiscated them, parents shrugged, and the companies? They sold more. Eventually, regulations tightened and most of these survival-style knives disappeared from toy shelves. But if you grew up in the 80s, chances are you or someone you knew had one stashed under their bed, next to their glow-in-the-dark ninja stars. If the knife didn't get you, the next toy might have, with a splash of liquid metal that rolled through your fingertips. Those giant metal slides were more like branding irons than playground equipment. The moment you sat down, you felt it. The searing burn of molten steel on the backs of your thighs. Every kid learned fast. You either wore jeans or brought a towel. The sun made the slide shimmer like a mirage, daring you to touch it anyway. Every burn came with a badge of pride and a story to tell. Who screamed the loudest, who made it down fastest, who got stuck halfway and had to be pushed. The heat rose in waves, and every trip down felt like surviving a trial by fire that somehow ended in laughter instead of tears. The brave ones went bare-legged anyway, screaming halfway down and still climbing right back up. The slide's squeal echoed through the park, a sound of triumph mixed with pain. The sun turned the whole playground into an oven, the kind of heat that made even the monkey bars hiss. But nobody stayed home because of a few burns. Those slides felt endless, shiny towers of courage where victory meant making it to the bottom without crying. If you got stuck halfway, a friend would shove you down, because no one quit in the middle. Today's plastic slides are smooth, safe, and shaded, but they do not have the same thrill. The old ones burned, scarred, and taught you what bravery and aloe vera really meant. Spam and pineapple bake was a dish that defined the 1960s strange obsession with sweet and savory fusion. Slices of Spam were arranged neatly in a casserole dish, each topped with a bright pineapple ring and a drizzle of brown sugar glaze. It was baked until syrupy and golden, filling kitchens with the scent of tropical mystery and processed meat. For many families, it was a symbol of post-war optimism. Hawaii in a can, served with pride and a side of canned green beans. The combination of salt, sweetness, and nostalgia made it oddly comforting, even if it didn't always look the part. Advertisers marketed it as both quick weeknight dinner and party showpiece, and somehow it managed to be both. Housewives praised its convenience while quietly admitting it was an acquired taste. But for children growing up in that era, the dish meant home, a warm plate of strange comfort in Technicolor kitchens. Today, the Spam and pineapple bake has faded into novelty, but its cheerful absurdity remains unforgettable. It was the edible embodiment of the 1960s, bright, bold, and blissfully unaware of its own weirdness. In what was possibly the most chaotic use of a federal utility, kids in the 1970s thought blowing up mailboxes was the height of backyard entertainment. M80s, basically mini dynamite, were dropped into mailboxes lit and boom. The mailbox would rattle, warp, or straight up explode like something out of a cartoon. It was illegal. It was dangerous. And for some reason, it was everywhere. You did not do it to be mean. You did it because you were bored. Fire plus explosion was the whole logic. And when that metal door blew open, everyone scattered like cockroaches. Sometimes it took out the post. Sometimes it left smoke curling from a melted box. Either way, it was awesome. The louder the bang, the better the story. If the mailbox actually flew into the street, you were a legend. Everyone ducked, covered their ears, and laughed like they were in an action movie. You never considered the mailman might call the cops. And if he did, you ran. Fast. No one really asked where the M80s came from. Someone always knew a guy. Or you saved up change and bought them from the shady fireworks stand by the highway. Once in a while, someone got caught. But most of the time, it was just another dumb dare carried out at 10 p.m. with no gloves and too much confidence. Today, that would make national news. Back then, the pogo ball looked like a cross between a spaceship and a bouncing accident waiting to happen. It was a simple concept, a rubber ball trapped inside a plastic disc. You stood on the disc, held your balance, and tried to bounce. Sounds harmless, right? It was not. The toy required an almost superhuman sense of balance. One wrong move, and the disc would tilt, hurling you sideways like a catapult. Ankles twisted, knees buckled, tailbones took the brunt of every failed jump. But in the 1980s, the pogo ball was a must-have. Everyone wanted one. It was advertised as a fun way to stay active. What they left out was how many kids ended up with sprained limbs, or how often the rubber would deflate mid-jump, or how the plastic rim would crack and turn into a jagged hazard under your feet. The toy looked safe, but it was deceptive. It tricked you into thinking you could master it. And maybe you could, for about 5 seconds before gravity reminded you who was boss. The pogo ball taught us that danger could be colorful, round, and come with its own instruction manual. Long before it became the center of heated environmental debates, shark fin soup was a fixture at high-end banquets and wedding receptions across parts of the U.S., especially within Chinese-American communities. Considered a symbol of wealth and respect, the dish wasn't just food. It was a gesture, served to honor guests and celebrate milestones. The preparation was painstaking. The fins, cartilage-heavy and flavorless on their own, were cleaned, soaked, and simmered for hours until they took on a gelatinous texture. They were then added to a rich broth made from chicken or pork, thickened with cornstarch, and often enhanced with mushrooms, scallions, and spices. This delicacy dates back over 1,000 years in Chinese culinary tradition, but in the 1980s, it saw a surge in popularity as Asian cuisine gained mainstream appeal in the West. Importers sourced fins globally, and high-end restaurants added the soup to their menus as a mark of prestige. The backlash came as awareness grew over finning, the practice of slicing fins off live sharks and discarding the bodies at sea. The ecological impact was severe. Shark populations declined dramatically, and calls for reform echoed through scientific and political spheres. Moon shoes were an attempt by Nickelodeon to capture the next big trend before it got out of their hands, essentially so they would have a monopoly on it. Moon shoes had a pretty simple idea. What if you could have trampolines in your shoes? And so they came up with these funky shoes that had exposed metal strings in them. Moon shoes were awfully bouncy, and finding your balance while wearing a pair of these heels made them look like cakewalks. However, finding your footing was not the most dangerous part about these shoes, as that honor was taken by the metal strings, which were the basis of the whole idea. Leaving them unexposed meant a lot of preventable ankle injuries, and do not get us started on how easy it was to trip and fall while you were in these. Essentially, they flopped badly and did not become the trendsetter the company was hoping for. Mercurochrome was the go-to cure-all for scraped knees, elbow bumps, and mystery cuts. Parents swore by it. Kids feared it. That bright reddish-orange liquid came in a glass bottle with a glass applicator wand, and just one dab left a dramatic stain that lasted for days. But here's the kicker. It contained mercury. Yes, mercury, the same heavy metal now known for its toxic effects. Back then, no one seemed too worried. You'd cry over the sting, get that radioactive-looking splotch on your skin, and be sent back outside with a pat on the head. It looked serious. It felt serious. It was practically a badge of honor. But despite the visual drama, the medical risk was invisible and long-lasting. Mercurochrome was banned in several countries over mercury concerns, yet the smell alone could transport you back to childhood panic and Band-Aid negotiations. But if your parents weren't coating your wounds with mercury, they might have been setting you up with something even more explosive, like a fun chemistry set packed with open flames and no supervision. When a child came home from school with head lice in the 1960s, the treatment was dichlorodiphényl trichloroethane, DDT, dusted directly onto the scalp. School nurses kept canisters of the white powder in their offices. Parents bought it at the hardware store. The same chemical compound that had been sprayed in massive quantities across Pacific battlefields during World War II was now being rubbed into the hair of 6-year-olds, rinsed out over kitchen sinks, and absorbed through the thin skin behind their ears. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had warned the country about DDT's environmental devastation as early as 1962, and President Kennedy ordered his Science Advisory Committee to investigate. But the chemical stayed legal for human use. The U.S. military quietly removed DDT from its own supply system in 1965 after body lice developed resistance to it. American kids apparently were not given the same consideration. The EPA did not ban DDT until 1972. Fiberglass insulated electric skillets were among the most popular plug-in cooking devices of the 1970s. Their convenient temperature dials and spacious cooking surfaces making them perfect for everything from pancake breakfasts to one-pan dinners. Families loved that these skillets heated evenly and could be used right at the table, eliminating the need to transfer food from stove to serving dish. The insulation wrapped around the heating elements contained fiberglass, which worked beautifully until the skillet aged or suffered scratches that exposed the material beneath. Once compromised, microscopic glass fibers could work their way into food or drift into the air during cooking sessions. People scraped metal utensils across surfaces without knowing they were releasing particles that irritated lungs and skin on contact. When manufacturers acknowledged the risks and regulators demanded safer alternatives, many families had already used these skillets for a decade or more. The convenient countertop cooking solution had been quietly shedding invisible hazards into Sunday brunches and weeknight dinners all along. DDT household insecticides were sprayed freely inside homes during the 1970s, coating kitchen corners, bedroom baseboards, and anywhere else bugs might dare to appear. Families trusted these products completely, believing the powerful chemical mist was protecting their homes from pests while posing no danger to people living inside. The spray cans promised quick results, and people used them liberally, filling rooms with a haze that settled onto countertops, toys, and furniture. Children played on floors where DDT residue lingered for weeks. Pets walked through treated areas and licked their paws clean, and nobody questioned what they were breathing. The chemical had been celebrated as a miracle of modern science, capable of wiping out mosquitoes and saving lives in regions plagued by malaria. But inside American homes, the compound accumulated in bodies, disrupted hormones, and passed through food chains in ways scientists were only beginning to understand. When researchers documented the environmental devastation and health risks, DDT was banned for household use, leaving a toxic legacy that took decades to fade. Toluene-based rubber cement was a household staple in the 1970s, kept in junk drawers and craft boxes for everything from school projects to quick repairs. The strong, distinctive smell filled rooms the moment the lid came off, and people used it liberally on paper, fabric, leather, and anything else that needed bonding. Children spread it across poster boards while parents patched shoes or fixed loose book bindings, all without ventilation or any thought of danger. But toluene is a powerful solvent that affects the brain and nervous system when inhaled. In poorly ventilated spaces, the fumes built up quickly, causing dizziness, headaches, and confusion that people often dismissed as nothing serious. Chronic exposure led to far worse outcomes, including memory problems and permanent neurological damage. When researchers documented these effects, regulators stepped in to restrict toluene in consumer products. Safer formulations replaced the old rubber cement, but families who had used it for years wondered what damage might already have been done. It is sobering to realize that something as simple as gluing a school project together once carried risks nobody bothered to mention. Halloween costumes in the 1980s were equal parts imagination and imminent combustion. The materials? Thin plastic, stiff polyester, and a mask that felt like a rubber band choking your face. These outfits came in a cardboard box with a clear window, showing off a crinkled costume and a vacuum-formed mask that smelled like a tire fire. They were sweaty, scratchy, and highly flammable. Add candles, jack-o'-lanterns, or sparklers into the mix, and you had a walking fire hazard. Kids would run from house to house while their capes or plastic sheeting flapped dangerously close to open flames. Some costumes even came with battery packs or accessories that sparked, because clearly, fire safety was not trending. The costumes were usually one-size-fits-none, meaning they dragged on the ground or clung like saran wrap. Parents tried to layer clothes underneath to keep kids warm, unknowingly adding more flammable fabric to the equation. Injuries happened. Fire departments raised concerns. But it wasn't until multiple safety campaigns aired on television, usually during Saturday morning cartoons, that people began paying attention. While those costumes reacted to fire, the next fashion fad reacted to you, and sometimes not in a good way. Before seatbelt laws and common sense, kids rode wherever they fit, including the trunk. It started as a joke. There's no room, just hop in. Then it became an adventure. The darkness felt exciting, the kind that made your heart race but your grin widen. You could hear the muffled sound of laughter and the rumble of the tires, like you were part of a secret mission nobody else could know about. When someone finally opened the trunk at the end of the ride, the rush of cool air felt like stepping out of another world, one built on daring and stupidity in equal measure. The darkness, the rumbling engine, the muffled laughter. It was like being part of a secret mission. Sometimes, if the trunk was too small, the hood became an option. Holding on tight while your cousin drove around the yard or down the block made you feel invincible. You were one bad turn away from disaster, but it felt like the world's best amusement ride. Parents probably knew, but pretending not to see was part of the unspoken deal. It sounds insane now, but back then, danger was something you laughed about later, not something to avoid. Every neighborhood had stories that began with, "You won't believe what we did," and somehow everyone lived to tell them. Canned macaroni and cheese sounded like the future when it hit shelves. A complete meal, pasta and sauce, sealed in a tin and ready to heat in minutes. It was marketed as the next big leap in convenience, promising creamy perfection without the mess. In truth, opening the can often revealed something closer to orange soup than dinner. The noodles were limp, the cheese oddly sweet, but it was fast and modern, and that mattered most in the 1960s kitchen. Advertisers sold it as space-age cooking, the kind of meal that fit perfectly with the decade's fascination with astronauts and progress. It was also a favorite among college students and single men who saw it as proof they could cook. Despite its questionable texture, canned macaroni and cheese became a minor icon of mid-century living, served proudly alongside TV dinners and instant coffee. It promised a taste of tomorrow, even if tomorrow tasted vaguely metallic. Everyone heard the story. The kid who mixed Pop Rocks with soda and exploded. His stomach burst. He died on the spot. You told it like it was gospel, even though it never actually happened. But knowing the risk only made it cooler. Pop Rocks fizzed and snapped in your mouth. Add cola, and it felt like science gone wrong. You held your breath and waited for the boom. It never came. But the anticipation was electric. You dared your friends like it was a countdown to detonation. Kids at lunch would slam soda and dump in the whole packet like mad scientists. You burped like thunder and pretended it hurt, just for the reaction. Someone always gasped, "It's happening!" and ran for the teacher, and every time you survived. But kind of wished something wild had happened. Every kid tried it at least once. Someone always dared someone else. If you were brave, you dumped a whole packet in and took a huge swig of soda right after. You burped like a volcano. You thought your throat was going to explode. You laughed so hard you choked, but you survived, and that made you a legend. Today, Pop Rocks are a novelty. Back then, they were a chemistry experiment and an urban myth rolled into one. And if you had exploded, well, at least it would have been on purpose. They were supposed to be cozy, a small, portable hammock for lounging in the backyard, reading comics, or daydreaming under a tree. The Hang 10 mini hammock seemed like the perfect escape, but it came with a terrifying flaw. It had no spreader bars, those wooden rods that keep a hammock open. Without them, the fabric would twist, fold, and tighten like a noose the moment someone lost their balance. And that is exactly what started happening. Children would climb in, relax for a second, then roll and get tangled, badly. Some fell and hit the ground, others got trapped inside the folds. The worst cases were far more tragic. What made it worse was how unassuming it looked. Just some cloth and rope, a harmless afternoon gift, until it became the most dangerous item in your yard. Recalls followed, but for some families, it was too late. The mini hammock left scars, not just physical ones, but emotional ones too. It reminded everyone that comfort can be a lie, and that danger does not always roar. Sometimes it just sways gently in the breeze. Tucked between layers of mashed potatoes and gravy, a bold twist once made its way into the humble shepherd's pie. Haggis shepherd's pie, a hearty fusion that quietly found its way into some Scottish-American homes during the 1980s. Traditional haggis, made from sheep's heart, liver, and lungs mixed with oats, suet, and spices, was encased in a stomach lining and boiled into a dense, peppery loaf. When combined with the familiar mashed topping of shepherd's pie, it created a dish that was both nostalgic and unapologetically rich in offal. This was more than a culinary experiment. It reflected necessity and cultural preservation. Scottish immigrants and expats sought comfort in familiar ingredients, and in many cases, nose-to-tail cooking wasn't just tradition, it was practicality. Nothing went to waste, and flavor was measured in heartiness, not delicacy. The problem? In 1971, the USDA banned the import of sheep lungs, citing concerns over fluid retention in the lungs that could pose a food safety risk. Domestic preparation lingered quietly in private kitchens for years, but by the 1980s, enforcement tightened, making true haggis nearly impossible to prepare legally in the U.S. For the outdoor American who loved spending time in nature's lap of luxury, wood-burning kits were a must-have purchase. In the early 70s, a very adventurous spirit took over the masses of America as it called them to the woods in search of a down-to-earth weekend. Lots of the people who often went on these camping trips, which more often than not ended up being solo ventures, would be going out camping for the first time. Not equipped with any real outdoor experience, they would purchase these kits impulsively, thinking they would dramatically boost their experience in the wilds. Sadly, all they did was cause light burns. because you still need to know how to work a kit and not just buy one. In the hands of inexperienced trekkers, they were more of a hazard than a safety tool in those situations. Clackers were two acrylic or glass balls tied to a string and handed to children with no safety warnings and a full green light. You'd hold the middle of the string, swing the balls upward and downward until they collided above and below your hand, producing that iconic clack-clack sound. It looked simple. It sounded addictive. It was also a hazard waiting to happen. The plastic versions could chip. The glass ones could shatter. And if you missed your rhythm, one ball went rogue, swinging at eyebrow height with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Kids practiced for hours, trying to get the timing right, turning every playground into a percussion concert of risk. Parents shrugged. Teachers banned them. Hospitals stocked up on ice packs and gauze. But still, they were cool. Until one clack too many ended in sharp pieces flying through the air. Eventually, safety commissions pulled them off shelves. But back then, one broken pair just meant you were in the market for another. And if that seemed dangerous, wait till you hear about people putting flammable foam containers directly onto gas stoves like it was just another Tuesday. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Lysol disinfectant was the best-selling feminine hygiene product in the United States. Not because women chose it freely, but because gynecologists recommended it. Advertisements featured female physicians in clinical settings, assuring women that douching with diluted Lysol would protect their marriages. The real message, barely coded, was contraception. With birth control still illegal under the Comstock laws until 1965, Lysol offered the illusion of pregnancy prevention. It did not work. A 1933 study at Newark's Maternal Health Center found that of 507 women who used Lysol regularly, nearly half became pregnant. The formula contained cresol until 1953, a caustic phenolic compound that burned vaginal tissue on contact. By 1911, doctors had already documented 193 poisonings and 5 deaths from Lysol douching. Lead-soldered copper cookware held a special place in 1970s kitchens, its gleaming reddish surfaces suggesting professional quality and timeless elegance that lesser pots could never match. Home cooks displayed these pieces proudly, believing they had invested in something that would last generations and make every dish taste better. The craftsmanship was undeniable, but hidden in the seams where copper panels joined together was lead solder that made the connection strong and seamless. Every time acidic ingredients like wine, vinegar, or tomatoes simmered in these beautiful pots, lead leached silently into the food. Families served marinara sauce and countless other dishes contaminated with a heavy metal that accumulated in bones and blood over time. Children absorbed the toxin even faster than adults, their growing bodies storing poison with every meal their parents prepared with such care. When researchers finally connected copper cookware to elevated lead levels in households, the bans followed quickly. Those elegant pots, once symbols of culinary sophistication, became warnings about how beauty and craftsmanship can sometimes mask dangers simmering beneath the surface. Leaded gasoline was pumped into every family car during the 1970s without a second thought, filling tanks at corner stations while children sat in back seats with windows rolled down, breathing in fumes that drifted through the summer air. The lead additive made engines run smoother, reduced knocking, and seemed like a technological triumph that benefited everyone. Gas station attendants wiped windshields while standing in clouds of exhaust, never suspecting that the fuel keeping America moving was slowly poisoning the population. Lead particles settled onto playgrounds near busy roads, drifted into open windows, and accumulated in soil where children played for years afterward. The damage was invisible but relentless, affecting brain development and contributing to behavioral problems researchers would later trace to widespread lead exposure. When scientists connected the dots, the evidence was overwhelming. Regulators phased out leaded gasoline, but the contamination left behind took generations to address. The fuel that powered a nation's cars had quietly harmed its children, a legacy that still echoes in health statistics today. Lead fishing tackle and sinkers were carried in every angler's tackle box throughout the 1970s. small dense weights that helped lines sink quickly and casts travel farther. Fishermen handled them constantly, biting them onto lines with their teeth, rolling them between fingers, and tossing them into lakes and rivers without a second thought. The weight felt natural, almost satisfying, and nobody imagined that such a simple tool could cause harm. But lead is toxic to both humans and wildlife. Anglers who bit sinkers onto lines ingested small amounts with every fishing trip, while lost tackle accumulated on lake bottoms where birds and fish swallowed it. Waterfowl died by the thousands from lead poisoning, and researchers traced the contamination back to fishing weights scattered across waterways. When regulators began banning lead tackle in certain states, many anglers resisted at first, struggling to understand how something so traditional could be dangerous. Today, safer alternatives exist, but the memory of lead sinkers remains a quiet reminder that even simple outdoor traditions can carry hidden environmental and health costs that take generations to understand. Hypercolor shirts were the 80s fashion flex you didn't ask for. Touch them, and they changed color. Sweat? Changed color. Breathing too hard in class? Boom, color change. These shirts were made with thermochromic dyes that reacted to temperature, which was science speak for everyone can now see your armpit situation. They were magical for about 10 minutes and then quickly turned into an awkward middle school experiment. But the real danger was in the dye. Some hypercolor clothing was made with chemicals that caused skin irritation, allergic reactions, and, in worst-case scenarios, a rash that looked like a heat map of embarrassment. Combine that with fading colors, poor washing instructions, and mystery reactions when exposed to sunblock or deodorant, and you had a garment that fought back. Eventually, the clothing faded for good, literally and figuratively, and safety concerns helped bury the trend for a while. Still, for a few brief years, it was the coolest, most color-shifting thing you could wear until it gave you hives. If your shirt didn't leave a mark, the next toy definitely did, especially when it was supposed to be just plastic. The commercials made it look perfect. A long stretch of green grass, sunshine, and kids gliding effortlessly down a slip-end slide. Reality was far less glamorous. Most yards had patches of dirt or rocks hiding under the grass, and that thin sheet of plastic offered zero protection. Every kid took a turn pretending they were Olympic swimmers, only to belly flop straight into a hidden stone. The mixture of water, mud, and dish soap made the ground so slick that even standing became a hazard. But that chaos, the shouting, the splashing, the skin burning from friction, was exactly what made it feel like summer never had rules. One good run and your knees were scraped raw, your elbows stinging, and your mom yelling to stop tearing up the lawn. But nobody cared. You kept sliding until the plastic ripped or someone hit a rock and called it quits. Sometimes you added dish soap to go faster, which only made the wipeouts worse. Water mixed with mud until everyone looked like they crawled out of a swamp. Still, nothing beat that rush. The laughter, the splashes, the wild sense of summer chaos. It was messy, painful, and absolutely worth it. Tuna casserole with potato chips was the great equalizer of 1960s comfort food. No dinner table was complete without it. A bubbling dish of canned tuna, peas, condensed soup, and a golden crust of crushed chips on top. It was cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable, the unofficial meal of every middle-class family. The crunch of potato chips against the creamy filling became a nostalgic sound of home, one bite away from childhood. Housewives loved it because it could feed a crowd on a budget, while children devoured it because it was pure comfort disguised as dinner. Some added mushrooms or cheese to dress it up, while others stuck to the basics, trusting the chips to do the heavy lifting. Tuna casserole represented the heart of 1960s cooking. Resourceful, practical, and unapologetically canned. It was served at potlucks, school functions, and Sunday suppers, a dish that united neighbors across kitchen tables. Today, it remains one of the few mid-century creations people still make, minus the chips, but never without the memories. In the 1970s, kids did not just carry firecrackers, they wore them. You would string a pack around your neck like beads and show off like it was Mardi Gras meets demolition. Firecrackers were taped together, looped with twine, or clipped to your jacket like edgy accessories. They were not supposed to be lit, but they always were. One spark from a cigarette, one kid trying to be funny with a lighter, and boom, you were suddenly more fireball than fashion. Ears ringing, clothes singed. Everyone screamed, but also kind of thought it was hilarious. The truly bold would light one firecracker just to see how fast they could yank it off before it went off. Kids ran in circles while tiny explosives popped at their heels. You could smell the sulfur and melted plastic from a block away. Nobody flinched when a shirt caught fire. It was just a thing that happens. And afterward, you wore the burn marks like battle scars. You showed up to the block party with explosives hanging off your shirt, and no adult said a word. Some even encouraged it. It was just boys being boys, even when it turned into a backyard fireworks disaster. Burns were common. Hearing loss was ignored. The risk was half the appeal. Today, even touching fireworks without gloves gets a warning. Back then, they doubled as jewelry. Pain was temporary. Looking cool? That was forever. It looked like something every space-obsessed kid dreamed of. A miniature spaceship toy from the hit series Battlestar Galactica, equipped with a spring-loaded missile launcher. What they did not tell you was that this toy was capable of firing projectiles straight down a child's throat. The missiles were small, hard, and fit perfectly into the mouth of a curious toddler. One launch was all it took. 1 second of distraction, one inhale at the wrong moment. That is how a young boy in Georgia died in 1978, and the aftershocks echoed well into the 1980s. The toy industry took a hard look at projectile toys after that incident, but the damage had been done. Kids loved the toy. Parents trusted the brand, and safety warnings were minimal at best. The missile launcher was meant to ignite imaginations, not funerals. Yet here we were, watching as one of the most popular franchises of the time became the face of a tragedy. The company eventually recalled the toy, redesigning it so the missiles no longer launched. But that did not stop similar toys from flooding the shelves in the years to come. The lesson came late, and the cost was high. We learned that sometimes danger comes not from what a toy does, but from how little thought goes into what might go wrong. From presidential banquets to family supper tables along the Gulf Coast, few dishes carried the same culinary prestige, or legal baggage, as turtle soup. For over a century, it was considered a delicacy in the U.S., particularly popular in the South and Mid-Atlantic. It even had a place of honor on the menu at political functions. President Taft reportedly adored it. Recipes varied, but traditional versions called for slow-simmering turtle meat, usually from freshwater species like the common snapping turtle, with tomatoes, sherry, hard-boiled eggs, and aromatic vegetables. The result was a thick, savory stew somewhere between gumbo and consommé. During the Great Depression and through wartime rationing, turtle soup held practical appeal. Wild turtles were accessible, high in protein, and could feed a family on a modest budget. Some communities even held turtle frolics, group hunting, and cooking events that doubled as social gatherings. The shift came gradually. As demand grew, turtle populations, especially the alligator snapping turtle, began to dwindle. Combined with growing concern for overharvesting and habitat loss, conservation laws followed. Nowadays, it is pretty common for people to have like 10 different forms of online financing. It is literally possible to transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars with the press of a single button, and in fact, most meaningful transactions are done that way. You might feel old if by now you still find yourself balancing checkbooks and carrying them around, since all the kids these days are onto Venmo and Cash App. Did you know it used to be the opposite? Nowadays, checks really make up only about 4% of all transactions in America. In the 1940s, there were about 2 billion checks in circulation, and that number quadrupled by 1980 when Gen X was thriving. Let that really sink in for a moment so that the creeping march of time really sets in, because from 8 billion to just a couple 100,000 per year is certainly a steep decline. Maintaining a proper checkbook is uncommon nowadays, and people either deal in cash up front or keep it strictly online. Maybe that is not too bad though, since it was kind of annoying keeping up with a checkbook all the time. Chemistry sets in the 1960s were less about learning formulas and more about dodging danger with every experiment. These kits came with powders, acids, glass tubes, and, wait for it, alcohol burners. Real ones. You'd light a flame with a match, pour flammable liquids into little dishes, and watch as something fizzed, foamed, or went up in smoke. It was thrilling, chaotic, and completely normal. Instructions were vague at best, and safety gear optional at most. Kids could melt plastic, set fire to paper, or accidentally discover the smell of burnt eyebrows. These were sold as educational tools, but really they were training grounds for pyromaniacs. You'd mix mystery powders just to see what color they turned, or if they'd explode. Parents watched from a distance, maybe keeping a glass of water nearby just in case. The burners themselves were tiny metal cups with open flames that danced like tiny bonfires across your kitchen table. One wrong move and suddenly your science project doubled as a fire drill. And if you didn't lose an eyebrow there, you might lose an eye to the next toy on the list, because clackers weren't just noisy, they were downright dangerous. Doctors in the 1960s did not just tolerate alcohol during pregnancy, they prescribed it. Obstetricians used intravenous ethanol to delay premature labor, and family physicians told expectant mothers that a glass of wine would help them relax and sleep better. The medical consensus held that the placenta acted as a barrier, filtering out anything harmful before it reached the fetus. That belief was completely wrong. The scientific community did not formally identify fetal alcohol syndrome until 1973, when researchers Kenneth Jones and David Smith at the University of Washington published the first clinical description. The first public health warning did not arrive until 1977. For more than a decade, millions of women drank through their pregnancies on their doctor's advice, and no one counted the damage. PVC plastic food containers revolutionized kitchen storage in the 1970s, their lightweight durability and airtight seals making them seem like the perfect solution for leftovers, lunch packing, and pantry organization. Families stacked them in refrigerators, microwaved them without hesitation, and filled them with everything from spaghetti sauce to birthday cake. But PVC plastic contained phthalates, chemical softeners that made the material flexible, but also leached into food over time. Heat accelerated this process dramatically, so every reheated casserole and every warm soup stored in these containers absorbed compounds now known to disrupt hormones. Children carried lunches to school in containers that slowly released chemicals into their sandwiches. Parents warmed baby food in plastic that transferred toxins with every heated spoonful. When researchers finally connected soft plastic containers to health concerns, regulators banned the most dangerous formulations. The containers that once symbolized modern convenience became cautionary reminders that storing food safely required far more than just a tight-fitting lid. Thalidomide sedatives were prescribed to pregnant women in the late 1950s and early 60s as a safe treatment for morning sickness, with effects still echoing into the 70s as families lived with the consequences. Doctors handed out the pills confidently, believing they had found a gentle solution for one of pregnancy's most uncomfortable symptoms. Women took them gratefully, trusting that anything prescribed by a physician must have been thoroughly tested and proven safe. But thalidomide crossed the placental barrier in ways nobody anticipated, interfering with fetal development during the most critical weeks of growth. Thousands of babies were born with severe limb deformities, missing arms, shortened legs, and other devastating conditions that shocked medical communities worldwide. The tragedy reshaped how drugs were tested and approved, forcing regulators to demand far more rigorous safety studies before anything reached pharmacy shelves. Families affected by thalidomide spent decades advocating for recognition and accountability, while the pharmaceutical industry faced a reckoning that changed its practices. The drug became a reminder that trust in science must be balanced with caution. Mercurochrome red antiseptic was dabbed onto every scraped knee, cut finger, and playground wound throughout the 1970s, leaving behind that distinctive bright red stain that children wore like badges of honor. Parents kept the little bottle in medicine cabinets alongside bandages and aspirin, reaching for it automatically whenever a child came running in with blood on their skin. The red color made wounds look dramatic and important, and the slight sting reassured everyone that the medicine was working. Nobody questioned what was inside the bottle or how it actually did its job. But mercurochrome contained mercury, a toxic heavy metal that absorbed through broken skin and accumulated in the body over time. Researchers eventually documented the risks of repeated mercury exposure, especially in children whose developing systems were particularly vulnerable. When regulators banned mercurochrome from over-the-counter sale, families were shocked to learn that their go-to first aid solution had been quietly introducing a poison with every application. The little red bottle that once symbolized parental care became another reminder that trust in familiar products does not always mean safety. Plastic swords from the 1980s were marketed as toys, but they swung like weapons. These weren't the foam-filled pool noodles of today. They were thick, rigid, injection-molded plastic, often with jagged edges or molded blades sharp enough to cut paper and maybe a sibling. The worst ones came with faux metallic paint that chipped off into your hands and eyes during every pretend duel. You'd whack your friends with full-force backyard swings, and instead of a bonk, you got a thwack followed by a loud ow. Eyebrows were split, cheeks were welted. And if you really got carried away, a trip to urgent care. No one wore helmets, no one wore padding. These toys were sold in the same aisle as coloring books and stuffed animals. Eventually, toy safety groups stepped in, and by the 1990s, anything that resembled a plastic weapon had to be padded, foamed, or dulled down to baby-safe levels. You think that's wild? Wait until we get into the next bouncing nightmare that doubled as a choking hazard. Cherry bombs and M80s were the forbidden fireworks, the kind every kid heard about but was not supposed to touch, which, of course, made them irresistible. They were small, loud, and powerful enough to make adults nervous. Lighting one felt like playing with fate. That split second where your brain said run, but your hand said wait just a little longer. The explosion rattled your chest and filled your ears with ringing, but it also filled you with pride. For those few seconds afterward, you felt like you had harnessed lightning itself. Lighting one felt like holding pure danger in your hand. You had just seconds to throw it before the explosion, and every second felt like forever. The noise was deafening, echoing through alleys and across backyards. Kids stuffed them in cans, mailboxes, or anthills to see what would happen. Spoiler: something always blew up. Parents warned about losing fingers, but the warning only added to the thrill. The aftermath smelled like smoke and glory. It was chaos in the best possible way, terrifying and addictive. Cherry bombs turned ordinary kids into demolition experts, at least until the cops showed up or your dad confiscated the rest. But even then, you knew you'd try again next summer. Canned creamed chipped beef, or SOS as soldiers once called it, found new life in the 1960s kitchens. After the war, it was repackaged as an easy, shelf-stable meal for busy families. The beef came in thin strips, swimming in a thick white sauce that needed only to be poured over toast. It looked simple, but it carried with it the taste of nostalgia. Homecomings, diners, and late-night suppers when money was tight. For some, it was comfort food. For others, it was punishment on a plate. Still, it found its audience among homemakers who craved convenience above all else. The dish became a staple of military households and a reliable standby for anyone who needed dinner fast. Its salty, creamy flavor was oddly addictive, though few admitted it out loud. Today, it's remembered with both fondness and disbelief, a relic of an era when canned meals were considered modern miracles. Some of them were in your house, some of them were in your hands before you could read the warning label. Each one passed through a store shelf, a government approval process, and a front door before anyone asked whether it belonged near a family. If you had one of these, or if this list reminded you of something you had not thought about in decades, leave it in the comments. Subscribe if you want more from the decade that sold everything and tested nothing.